Thank you so much. So good morning. For me in Nashville, Tennessee, it is almost 11 o'clock in the morning. It's 61 degrees Fahrenheit, a beautiful day in Tennessee. The colors are turning and they are absolutely beautiful. So I'm going to talk about trust. I hope we have a few questions afterwards. If we don't have time, you can send me email asking questions, comments about this presentation or anything. And if you think the presentation is worthwhile, I'm happy to send you a copy. There's no copyright on any of these slides. You can do anything you want to. You can change them around so that you can share if you think this message is worthwhile. You can share what I have put together here with your friends, with your colleagues, and let's connect on LinkedIn. So in Los Angeles, there's an interesting museum. It's called the Museum of Tolerance, and it has two entrances. The one on your right is green, and it's labeled unprejudiced. The one on the left, the red door, is labeled prejudiced. Only one door really works. And of course, everyone who comes to the museum wants to go in the green door. They pound on the door when it doesn't open, demanding to be let in, because of course we all believe that we see the world realistically, that we're not prejudiced. We don't stereotype other people. We make rational decisions about who other people are and how they behave. Unfortunately, the very first lesson in this museum is that the only way in is through the red door. The realization that we all are prejudiced. We all stereotype. We all make judgments about other people. We all decide pretty quickly who we trust, who we collaborate with, who we like. I'm going to take you back to 1954, long before most of you were born, for an interesting experiment. It's a classic in behavioral science, a very strange experiment that was led by a researcher named Sharif. And he involved a group of young boys in Oklahoma. He had 22 12-year-old boys who were randomly assigned to one of two groups. They were very similar to one another. They had gone to the same school. They were in the same grade. They were in good health. They were all Protestant. They were all white. He put them in two different buses and said, we're going to go camping in a local state park called Robbers Cave. Now, the boys didn't know it, but they were part of an experiment. The staff for this camp, well, they were graduate students doing research. And in this research, there were several phases. In phase one, the two groups of boys had their own part of the state park, their own cabin. They went hiking, they went swimming, they do what 12-year-old boys do, camping, enjoying themselves. And as they did so, an interesting thing happens. In fact, now we know that in small groups, we tend to identify with each other. We tend to, we call ourselves something. We give ourselves a name. And these boys did that. They called themselves, the one group, the Rattlers, the other group, the Eagles. They had their own songs that they would sing while they were hiking through the woods. They had a flag they would display on their cabin. They developed a group identity. You could say they would say, we are us. This is something humans do, especially in small groups. We begin to develop an us. Now, in development, we like to say that's a good thing. Teams should have an identity. They should say, we are an us. The downside, backed up by so much research, is that as soon as you have an us, then you have a them. Those who are not part of our group. We do this so quickly. We do this so easily. It's a natural, hardwired tendency that we have to divide up immediately into an us and a them. And in phase one, that's exactly what these 12-year-old boys did. Toward the end of the first phase, the camp counselors who were, remember, they were graduate students, they led their group to gradually become aware of the other group. They didn't see them yet, but they could hear them in the woods. And they began to label them. They definitely called them, those people. In fact, they were pretty severe. They used racial epithets. They called the other group names, pretty bad names. And they threatened them, even though they couldn't see them yet. They said, they better not come over here. They better not use our hiking trails. They better not swim in our swimming hole. Now, if you remember, the two groups were essentially identical. Same age, same religion. Randomly assigned to two groups that now hated each other. Well, you could almost say they were ready to fight a war. In phase two, the camp counselors introduced the two groups to each other. Now they got to see the other boys, and they began to have contests. They had ball games and running contests, swimming contests, hiking contests. And there were prizes at the end of these contests. You can imagine that this contest atmosphere and the prizes began to add fuel to the fire that was already burning. It amplified the us versus them. We see this in ordinary sports teams. We identify with one team or the other, and we have violent, in many cases, violent tendencies toward those others who in many cases are just like us, but we're ready to fight for our group, our identity, our team. And that's what happened during phase two. Now we are face to face. Now we see who those others are. Now we have contests where there are prizes. We have winners and losers. That brings out all our deep, hardwired tendencies to identify us versus them. In fact, things got so bad that now we have actual violence. The Eagles attacked the Rattlers, burned their flag, fighting between the boys. More contests fueled more violence. They began to stockpile rocks in case of attack, weapons of mass destruction. Remember, these are essentially identical groups. These are 12-year-old boys, and they're ready to fight. In phase 3, the graduate students were instructed to, try to bring the two groups back together. So they had some non-competitive activities. Let's watch a movie while we're all together in the dining hall. Let's eat together. Let's have our meals together. Let's have fun. I often wonder, I see that in organizations, team building exercises. Let's have fun together. Isn't that the way you do it? You have fun. That builds cooperation, trust. Well, unfortunately, the graduate students found that their efforts failed. In fact, things got worse. They began having food fights. In the dining hall, eating together didn't bring them together. It just gave them a chance to throw hot dogs and baked beans at one another, amplifying the violence instead of making it better. Let's leave them behind and talk about science. What we know from studies of behavioral science is that this tendency that we have is a natural one. It's hardwired in all of us. Then in a very short time, we do tend to form groups where we say we and us. And yes, it's not just about religion or politics, things where we feel and have deep connection. This is any group. In fact, research has shown it can take almost nothing to get us to form an us. And those of us who look at the inside of organizations, we see this all the time. Development teams, we're an us. Those other people. So if something goes wrong, we did the best we could. It must have been somebody else who was responsible. And while all of this is going on, we tend to think, like those people pounding on the green door in the Museum of Tolerance, that we're okay. We're not biased. We see the world clearly. We are rational thinkers. We're realistic about our capabilities and the abilities of others. Evolutionary psychologists who look at how our long history as humans has led us to where we are today say, if you go back to the Paleolithic, in the Stone Age, our ancestors, the hunter-gatherers, they had to every day make very quick categorization decisions. Is that food something good, or should I avoid it? Uh-oh, is that a stick up ahead, or is that a snake? Rarely did we run into another group, but when we did, we had to make a very quick decision. Are they friends or are they enemies? And this tendency to have to categorize, to label, things, and people got us to where we are today. We evolved to support this behavior because it meant survival. If you did a good job of labeling, of categorizing, you were more likely to survive. So we're stuck with that. We're stuck with that hardwired tendency to label, especially label other people. In fact, that's what we do all day. We label other people. Well, who's working hard? Who isn't? Who's smart? Who isn't? Sometimes it's not a conscious decision. For those of you who have read Daniel Kahneman's work, we know the difference between System 1 and System 2. It may not be a System 2 conscious, I am thinking about labeling other people. It's mostly unconscious, System 1, and we do it quickly and so easily. There's research that shows people who are in a managerial role and have to bring in new people to their teams and make up their minds almost instantly about whether the new team member will be okay or not. Well, I've never been a manager. I don't know whether that's good or bad, but I have lots of friends who are managers, so I asked them. I said, is this true? The research says that managers make up their minds so quickly before they have real evidence, before they've seen how well the new person performs. Is that true? What do you think? And the answer is always the same. The person I'm talking to stumbles around a little, hesitates, saying, well, Linda, I guess maybe, yes, I guess I do. But you know what? I'm always right. Of course. Of course the manager is always right. Because once the manager has made up his or her mind, whether the new person is going to be okay or not, then that's how the manager sees that person. That's how the manager treats that person. That's how that manager evaluates that person. And the person who's being evaluated also knows, at least unconsciously, knows how he or she is being treated, knows whether or not the manager thinks they're okay. It's a feedback loop that results in the behavior that's expected. The way you treat people becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You treat them well, you expect good things, so much more likely to get good things than if you don't. And this is a bad thing. Stereotyping, making up your minds about who other people are. We know that people are so much more complex than the few little clues that we get initially about who they are. And what's really bad, we even do this to ourselves. If we believe we don't have it, we're not right, we're not smart, we're not good, then we become that self-fulfilling prophesical result. We become the person we expect. What a loss. What a loss to the world. We know in evidence that simply taking stereotype groups and reminding them, oh, you're female, or you're a member of a group that doesn't do well in this situation, that in an experiment, you get that behavior. You can get lower scores on a math test simply by reminding the participants that they are women. Even in games, those who play a weaker character don't do as well as those who are playing a stronger character, even when the players are identical. Again, the self-fulfilling prophecy that we impose on the world and ourselves. We know that changes behavior, stereotyping. It made me remember something Michael Hill told me a long time ago. I finally understood it. He said, rule number 1 for managers: catch them doing something right. So now the manager goes out into the world looking, anticipating, hoping for good things. And that means now the manager is more likely to see good things. That means now those who are part of the manager's team feel that the manager is looking for good things and are more likely to produce good things. Those of us who do retrospectives remember that Norm Kurth had something called the prime directive. Always assume that everyone was doing the best job he or she could. If that's your expectation, the team over time will do better. So I'm a paid subscriber to Harvard Business Review. Please don't tell them. If you can't find this article, and if you are a manager, you should read about this power. The power you have to get what you want from your team. It's called the Pygmalion effect. So send me some email if it's not available to you online, and I will be happy to send you that paper. Look how old it is, 1988. If you haven't read it, I'm just saying you should have a look. Oh my goodness, I forgot those children. They're back in the, oh no, having a food fight with hot dogs and baked beans flying all, what shall we do? The graduate students had an inspiration. They said, the movies don't work. Having fun doesn't work. Let's make a real problem for these boys to solve. So they announced that all of a sudden the water supply to the entire camp had been cut off for some reason. And they said, we think it's somewhere in the water pipe, but the water pipe is so long, it's a mile. Everyone must work together. We will look carefully over every inch of that pipe, and we will see if we can find the problem. We all must work together. And so all the boys headed out into the woods. They all lined up along the pipe. They all hiked for the mile, and they find it, a clogged valve. They found it. And when they did, they celebrated and they said, we found it. We solved this problem. And things began to change. So let's have some more real projects. Dangerous tree was about to fall on the dining hall. It will take all of us. We have to get some ropes. We must all work together to pull that tree away from the dining hall. The truck that brings supplies got stuck in the mud. We will all have to work together to get the truck out of the mud. We will all have to push through a series of real problems that required everyone. All must work together, must cooperate. We all must contribute to solve a problem that we all have. Was successful in the two groups back together so that when it was time for them to go home, they decided they could all ride in the same bus. They could all sing all the songs. Those who had won prizes shared their money so that they could stop and buy treats, hamburgers, and shakes for everybody. Well, Linda, this is a nice story, but really, after all, these boys were all alike, weren't they? They were all the same age. They had similar backgrounds. Bringing them back together, well, that really isn't that difficult. Come on. What about if you had some real problems, some real serious problems, not just, okay, camping in the woods, and now we're going to fight over a swimming hole. What about something serious? This led to a follow-up experiment. Sorry, it's also about 11-year-old boys. This time religion is part of the picture, and that is serious. This was an experiment done in Beirut with 11-year-old boys who were Christians and boys who were Muslim. Religious contention is long-standing in this area, and these boys had all been raised in religious schools. So they were pretty serious about it. They went through the same phases. In phase 1, they created a group called the Blue Ghosts and another group called the Red Genies. And in phase 2, remember where they amped up the differences? Yes, violence broke out. But this time, it was more serious. This time there were real weapons. There were knives. 3 of the Red Genies had a knife, came at a Blue Ghost. The camp counselors, the graduate students decided this was way beyond what they were prepared to handle. So they canceled the experiment. At that point, they didn't want to go on and risk some serious repercussions. Aha! So there, Linda, real differences. So it does matter, doesn't it? And if you're thinking what I was thinking when I read about this experiment, then you would be wrong. Because the two groups were not divided by religion. The Blue Ghosts and the Red Genies each had Muslims and Christians. Those Red Genies who found the knives, they were Christian, yes. But the Blue Ghost they attacked was also Christian. Do you realize what this result shows? That the ties these boys felt to their groups were stronger than the ties they felt to religion. This identity that leads us to collaborate and trust and respect is so deep in us. It's much, much older than religion has only been around for a short time in our long history. Our feeling that we want to be with a small group of people that we trust is so much stronger than any political or religious or current day tie that we have. So all of the scientists now say, yeah, we do this. And it's been with us a long time. This classification thing, us and them. But it's counterbalanced by this very deep, very strong tendency to love working in a small group. So on the one, we label people. On the other hand, we trust. Both of those. Both of us are so strong in us, and there's nothing we can do about it. It's hardwired. And what it takes to bring us together, something called shared goals. We have to believe in the same thing. And it's what we all believe is important, our value system. I first read this research and wondered, is this part of what makes agile culture? This belief that we all share something? This belief that we're all an us? I looked at some of the agile practices and I could see it in the daily stand-up. This is commitment. Here's what happened to me yesterday. I'm reporting back based on what I said I would do. I'm saying to the group, I made good on my promise. In pairing, we share what we know. We share what we've learned. Those time-boxed iterations are a commitment that we make to the people with whom we interface, clients, customers, users, business side. And of course, in the retrospective, we as a group, what have we learned? What holds us together? I think this may just be a problem in the US, but I could be wrong. We get mixed up. We somehow think that the people we work with, the people we collaborate with, the people we trust, we must like them. That's not the case. I don't know how many times I've been on a team with people I basically did not like, but I could collaborate with them. I worked with them. I trusted them. I respected them. Those are different feelings. Those are very different kinds of categories. Collaboration means I do my job, and if I don't, you can't do yours. We are tied together, just like those 11 and 12-year-old boys who work together. Unless we all pull on the rope, unless we all walk along the mile-long water pipe, unless we all do our part, we can't succeed. And the emotion, the feeling that comes out of that is not about liking. It's about trust and respect. If we had to make a list of the things we really care about, trust and respect would be at the top. We really like that. We feel better. We are happier when the people in our lives trust us and respect us. You can measure it. You can measure the performance of groups that exhibit trust and respect. They're healthier. They're happier. They suffer less from anxiety and depression. I wonder if this is an important element of agile teams that we've missed somehow. This feeling that collaboration results from trust and respect, from the feeling that what I do is important to what you do, and what you do is important to what I do. And we must both be there for each other in order for us to have success. I want to believe that this is possible. I want us to look at examples where this works. And so I take you back to World War I, which is a long, long time ago. This was even before I was born. There's a wonderful book that documents how people felt during World War I. There were miles of trenches in this war that we will never see again. And in those trenches, the soldiers spent day after day in mud and blood and disease. But they could see just a short distance away. They could see others, them, those on the other side. They could see them who were also in the mud and the blood and the horror of World War I. And what happened in those trenches is something very strange and interesting. Because along the miles and miles and miles of trenches, little tiny pockets of peace broke out spontaneously. No one went to a negotiation table and hammered out the details. They just evolved. They somehow agreed not to fire on the others when the wounded were being taken away, to stop firing when food was being brought down, when reinforcements were being brought in. Nobody said, hey, at 4:00, that's when we're going to stop firing so that you people can have a little respite. They just did it. Oh, Linda, come on. I thought you said we had to have common goals. This is a war. We're fighting each other to the death. What's the common goal here? Pretty obvious, isn't it? The people in the trenches, they didn't start the war. They were there not because they wanted to be. The common goal was they just wanted to go home. They wanted to go home in one piece. They wanted peace. You know, we're coming up on the holiday time for those who celebrate Christmas. And I have a whole stack of, yes, these are even DVDs so that I don't lose them, Christmas movies that give me hope. So if you have access to old movies, I recommend this one. This is what happened during Christmas in 1914. It's a true story about World War I, about men coming out of the trenches, men who had been fighting each other to celebrate a season. It's definitely a hopeful, a worthwhile movie. I recommend it. Joyeux Noel, a little French for everybody. Well, you know I love animals. I love to talk about bonobos. We're descendants of animals. Maybe here's another hopeful experiment to close. This is about monkeys. So, now, not apes, not bonobos, but monkeys. Two different species in particular, the rhesus macaques. Well, they're interesting animals because they are so aggressive. They're used a lot in scientific experiments. The rhesus macaques are violent and aggressive. They fight all the time. The other species are called the stump tails. Well, you can imagine what they look like. They have no tails, but they are peaceful, easygoing, not violent or aggressive. They spend a lot of time grooming. Reminds me a little bit of bonobos. So the experiment was this. They took two groups of very young rhesus macaques and put them together with very young stump tails. And the question was, when? Could the stump tails influence the rhesus macaques? Or would the influence go the other way? What would happen to these very young monkeys at the end of a pretty long experimental period? And what they found was the two groups got along pretty well. They played, they slept together, they had their meals together. Now, the stump tails don't have any tails. So they were fascinated by the tails of the rhesus monkeys because the rhesus have long, fluffy, soft tails. And the stump tails were so entranced that they couldn't keep their hands off the monkeys' tails, and they taught them to groom, especially the tails. And the rhesus macaques found, well, they kind of liked that. They kind of liked this grooming. And they especially liked having their tails groomed. So the stump tails taught the rhesus macaques to settle their differences with grooming instead of being aggressive. So if this were a war of sorts, you could say the stump tails or the peace-loving, they won. And this effect stayed long after they separated the two groups. These rhesus began to teach grooming to their fellow rhesus macaques. What a hopeful message that we can learn. We can learn to find a better way. We can learn to work together. This is a picture of stump tails. They don't have any tails, obviously, but they are grooming each other. So I hope that leaves you with a little message of hope. In the unfortunate election in my country in 2016, we were facing something much worse than the rhesus macaques and the stump tails. We were at each other's throats. We could not get along. I felt I had to find a better way. So I joined an organization I still support, and it is now becoming international. It's called Braver Angels. It comes from a speech that Abraham Lincoln gave at his first inauguration, calling on our better angels to find a way instead of fighting a civil war. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right. And what Braver Angel does is simply have workshops where you have a chance to have a conversation, just like CACs and the stump tails, progressives, conservatives, liberals, Democrats, Republicans. We all get together and we talk one-on-one about very difficult issues. We don't necessarily change each other's minds, but what we learn is that there are better ways. There are better ways of getting along. Braver Angels has only gotten bigger over the last 7 years. I'm still a supporter. I encourage you to go to the website, check it out, and see if maybe that's something you can become involved in. We need a better way. I'm going to close